M18 Hellcat tank destroyer battles were never supposed to look like this. On the morning of December 19th, 1944, German Panther crews near the Belgian village of Noville reported something that made no tactical sense. American tanks were everywhere. They appeared out of thick Ardennes fog, fired a single shot into a Panther's side, and vanished before the turret could even begin to turn. Minutes later, the same attack came from a completely different direction. To German eyes, it felt like an ambush by an entire armored division. German intelligence rushed the reports to 2nd Panzer Division headquarters. Their conclusion was clear. Noville was crawling with American armor. The reality was far more disturbing. There was no division. There wasn't even a brigade. What the Germans were fighting was a handful of lightly armored vehicles that, on paper, should have been slaughtered in minutes. The M18 Hellcat tank destroyer weighed just 18 tons. Its armor was so thin that German crews joked you could punch through it with a boot. One clean hit from a Panther or Tiger would kill everyone inside. And yet, the Germans could not land that hit. M18 Hellcat tank destroyer crews were exploiting a flaw the German war machine never fully solved. Speed versus rotation, motion versus mass. German tanks were designed to dominate frontal engagements. Thick armor, devastating guns. But those guns were mounted in turrets that depended on engine power to move. And tanks do not fight at high engine revolutions. They fight at idle, crawling, waiting. A Tiger 1 at combat idle could take several minutes to rotate its turret a full circle. Even the more advanced Panther struggled. Turning 90 degrees could take up to 20 seconds under battlefield conditions. That delay was invisible on blueprints. It was deadly in fog. This was not a minor technical detail. It was a structural weakness, and the Americans had built an entire weapon system around exploiting it. M18 Hellcat tank destroyer doctrine did not come from desperation. It came from heresy. In 1941, a lieutenant colonel named Andrew Davis Bruce was put in charge of the tank destroyer tactical and firing center. His mission was simple: find a way to stop German panzers. His conclusion was not. Bruce studied every engagement where Allied tanks had been destroyed. He analyzed German blitzkrieg tactics down to timing, angles, and crew behavior. And he reached a conclusion that contradicted everything the Army believed about armored warfare. Armor was not the answer. Speed was. Bruce argued that meeting German tanks head-on was suicide. Their frontal armor was too thick, their guns too powerful, but their sides were thin, their turrets slow. If a vehicle could move faster than a turret could rotate, it could survive. Flank, fire, disappear, repeat. The Army thought the idea bordered on madness. They approved it anyway. M18 Hellcat tank destroyer design fell to the Buick Motor Division in 1942. Harley Earl's automotive designers were brought in, the same minds that would later shape America's post-war cars. What they built looked less like a tank and more like a stripped-down racing machine on tracks. Armor was cut to the bare minimum. 13 millimeters on the front hull, slightly more on the turret face. Enough to stop rifle fire, nothing else. When crews saw the specifications, morale dropped. 13 millimeters was not protection, it was concealment. Inside that hull, you were not safe. You were just harder to see. But inside that fragile shell was a Wright radial aircraft engine. The same power plant used in the Sherman, placed into a vehicle nearly half the weight. The result was staggering. 55 miles per hour on tracks, the fastest tracked armored vehicle of the Second World War. The Hellcat was not built to trade blows. It was built to run. M18. Hellcat tank destroyer math changed the battlefield. At 30 miles per hour, a Hellcat moved more than 40 feet every second. In the time a Panther needed to rotate its turret 90 degrees, a Hellcat could reposition hundreds of feet. That meant German gunners faced an impossible calculation: lead the target and hope it kept moving straight, or track it and watch the shell land where the Hellcat used to be. And they only got one chance. Because while the German turret was turning, the Hellcat crew was already lining up a 76mm shot into side armor that had never been designed to take it. Then the Hellcat vanished again, down another street, behind another building, into the fog. By December 1944, this theory was about to be tested against the full weight of the German counteroffensive in the Ardennes. Bastogne was surrounded. Supply lines were cut. Visibility was near zero. For Hellcat crews, stopping meant death. Movement meant survival. And in the frozen streets of Noville, speed was about to rewrite what armored warfare looked like at point-blank range. The morning of December 20th, 1944, dawned cold and gray over the Ardennes. The fog lingered in the streets of Noville, clinging to rooftops and curling around corners. For the crews of the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, it was a battlefield as unforgiving as it was invisible. Every shadow could hide a Panther. Every sound could signal a Tiger. But their enemy did not yet understand the rules of this war, the rules of speed, surprise, and precision. Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Templeton had drilled his men for this exact moment. He had told them repeatedly, "You will not survive by armor. You will survive by motion, by anticipation, by being where they do not expect." And the men had learned quickly. Each M18 Hellcat was stripped of unnecessary weight, every engine tuned, every 76mm round counted. The streets of Noville became a deadly chessboard. At a sharp bend in the main street, a Hellcat suddenly appeared, moving so fast that even seasoned German crews barely registered it. A Panther turret swiveled slowly, hydraulics whining as it tried to track the target. But the Hellcat had already passed. Its gun poked around the corner, sending a 76mm shell into the Panther's side armor. Steel met steel with a deafening crack, and the German crew never had a chance to fire back. The Hellcat reversed at full speed, disappearing behind a ruined house, only to reappear moments later on the opposite side of the column. The pattern repeated throughout the morning. Sherman tanks and paratroopers provided cover and support, but the M18s were the tip of the spear. They darted between buildings, over frozen roads, across snowdrifts, always moving, always striking. Each kill was calculated in seconds, lateral distance covered, turret traverse time, angle of attack. Mathematics had become a weapon, and the numbers favored the Hellcat. For the German crews, the experience was maddening. Reports sent back to the 2nd Panzer Division headquarters described phantoms and impossible numbers of enemy tanks. They believed they were facing a full American armored division. In reality, it was a single reinforced battalion, moving like a single living organism, each M18 complementing the others, each shot timed and calculated. The psychological impact was devastating. German officers cursed their engineering marvels. Turrets too slow, engines too heavy, crews too slow to respond to the phantom movements. Inside the open-topped Hellcats, the crews endured frostbite, snow, and the deafening roar of battle. Mortar rounds exploded around them. Sniper fire zipped through the streets. Yet every man knew that stillness meant death. Each Hellcat carried only a skeleton crew: commander, gunner, loader, driver. Coordination and trust were paramount. One misstep, one pause could mean the end. Yet their training and the sheer speed of the vehicle allowed them to dominate the battlefield. By noon, over 20 German tanks had been destroyed or disabled. The 705th was a blur of steel and smoke, striking from unexpected angles, vanishing before retaliation could be organized. Their tactics had evolved into a form of lethal art. The Hellcat would approach, fire a precision shot, reverse or swerve, and strike again from a completely different location. The Germans never saw them coming, and when they did, it was already too late. Colonel Templeton moved among his men, observing, directing, and sometimes firing alongside them. His calm under pressure was a stabilizing force. Even when a Hellcat was hit, the crew rarely panicked. Damage was assessed, routes adjusted, and the hunt resumed. Every moment of survival reinforced the doctrine: speed over armor, calculation over brute force. By the end of the day, the small American force had inflicted a staggering toll on the German advance. Panthers and Tigers, machines designed to dominate the battlefield, were now casualties of their own limitations. The M18 Hellcats had proven that a light, fast, and agile tank destroyer could outmaneuver and outgun the heaviest armor when deployed correctly. As night fell, the fog settled once again over Noville. The streets were littered with the wreckage of defeated tanks, yet the men of the 705th remained vigilant. The battle was not over. Every kill had bought time, not just for the battalion, but for the 101st Airborne holding Bastogne. Every maneuver, every risk had contributed to the larger war effort. The Hellcat had become more than a machine. It had become a symbol of ingenuity, courage, and speed. The embodiment of the idea that sometimes survival depends on being faster than death itself. Spring of 1945. The snow of Ardennes had melted, leaving muddy fields and the scarred remnants of villages in its wake. The war in Europe was approaching its final stages, but for the crews of the 805th Tank Destroyer Battalion in Italy, the lessons of Bastogne were about to be tested again. The M18 Hellcat, fragile yet unstoppable, was about to face a retreating German army in the Po Valley, a perfect hunting ground. The columns of German trucks, half-tracks, and tanks moved north toward the Alps, unaware that American tank destroyers were waiting beside them. Unlike in Bastogne, these German units were disorganized, exhausted, and stretched thin. Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Fowler, commander of the 805th, had studied the same doctrine pioneered by Templeton in the Ardennes: speed over armor, flanking over frontal assault. The Hellcats would strike not from behind, but from parallel, matching the retreating vehicles stride for stride. At 30 miles per hour, the M18S threaded between the trees, across open fields and along narrow roads. The German gunners spun their turrets frantically, trying to track a target that was already elsewhere. By the time a 75mm round reached its mark, the Hellcat had moved hundreds of feet laterally, leaving smoke and chaos in its wake. Each shot was precise, aimed at the side or rear of a German tank, half-track, or supply vehicle. The casualties were staggering. Crews painted black cat logos on their turrets, unauthorized but a symbol of pride. The markings reminded them, and the enemy, that these were hunters, not just machines. The open-topped Hellcats exposed the men to wind, rain, and enemy fire. Yet their speed offered protection no armor could provide. Each decision, each maneuver was a gamble. One hesitation could mean instant death, but the Hellcats moved like shadows, always anticipating the enemy's next position. The Po Valley became a relentless chase. German columns tried to maintain formation, but Hellcats darted beside them, behind them, over small rises and around bends. Trucks overturned, half-tracks disabled, and retreating tanks destroyed. The speed, coordination, and daring of the M18 crews created a psychological terror. German soldiers reported seeing phantom tanks, black silhouettes moving impossibly fast. The reality was simply superior tactics and engineering. By the end of April 1945, the 805th had confirmed over 50 kills in the Po Valley alone. The M18 Hellcat, though lightly armored, had earned a reputation unmatched by any other American vehicle. Its high mobility, combined with expert crews, allowed it to outperform heavier tanks like the Panther or Tiger, not by brute strength, but by intelligence, timing, and motion. Historians later would debate the Hellcat's design. Some argued it was too lightly armored, too exposed. Yet the statistics spoke clearly. 526 confirmed kills for the M18 across the European theater, an exchange ratio of roughly 2.4 to 1. The speed doctrine had worked. The men had chosen their battles wisely, trading steel for survival and tactical advantage. The war ended, but the lessons of the Hellcat endured. The tank destroyer concept faded from the American military doctrine, replaced by heavily armored main battle tanks. But the philosophy, speed, surprise, and precision, remained in the minds of tacticians and historians alike. The M18 Hellcat had proven one fundamental truth: even the heaviest armor could not hit what it could not track. And in the dusty fields of Italy, in the snow-covered streets of Noville, and in countless photographs and stories, the Hellcat lived on, a symbol of ingenuity, bravery, and the idea that sometimes the fastest way to win a war is simply to stay one step ahead.